Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast hate the idea of losing money, but now there's nothing they can do about it. Past decisions can just come back to haunt you. Welcome back, everyone. MTG Moxman here. Thanks again for being here on the channel with me today. Can you imagine how angry a company like Hasbro has to be at Wizards of the Coast? I mean, angry. Because although they bought the company years ago and it seemed like a good deal, I'm sure as the years have gone by, that decision and the choices that Wizards of the Coast made before Hasbro bought them have led to nothing but grief. Lots of lawyer work there trying to figure out what to do when it comes to the reserve list. It's an untapped gold mine that they can't access without angering too many people. And if the 30th anniversary has taught them anything, it's to leave it alone. Even more so with Dungeons and Dragons, because when Hasbro bought the company, they're thinking about board games like Monopoly. People play it, they go around, they take turns, and it's over. You play the exact same game over and over. But with Dungeons and Dragons, as well as with Magic the Gathering, the game is ever evolving, ever changing. The concepts, the players evolve with the game, and those players are set in their ways. They like things the way they are, whether it's Magic or Dungeons and Dragons. So when you think of those games and any changes they try to make, they're realizing they can't make them because of past decisions made by the company previously before they were bought. When you think of Wizards of the Coast, before they were owned by Hasbro, flush with cash, and they go out and they buy TSR, which was Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. That's how I remember it in my second edition handbooks. And they go and they buy Magic the Gathering, which had already made the decision to create the reserve list. In that time, it seemed like the right decision to the company. I'm positive. They were losing money left, right, and center. Players were angry, not buying stuff. They were like just mired in problems. All right. Ever since they created the Chronicle set, it just went downhill. They had to mend the wound, so they created the reserve list. But now, when Hasbro looks back, imagine how angry they are, realizing they can't tap certain pieces of the IP they would like to. And I'm sure it's not anger as in like, grr, I'm angry at you. Oh, right? It's like when people probably say when they see the beard all trimmed and they see the nice $5 haircut I gave myself in the mirror. That's right, self-inflicted haircut and beard trimming by the Moxman to tame the wild beast. Imagine how you feel with that. When they say, I can't get in there, I can't access it. I know that Black Lotus is worth money and we can never reproduce it. They can produce cards close to it. They can go around it. They can go under it. They can go over it. But they can't recreate the actual piece without angering a lot of people. So when you look at this and you look forward to the sales that happen, when I do a Hot 10 every week, and you see the reserve list sales, you see cards going for hundreds of dollars on the reserve list. Even if it's only 20 sales a week, but it's a $100 card or a $200 card or a $500 dual land. That's tens of thousands of dollars of sales just in one of the Hot 10. Whereas my modern staple Hot 10, that thing could have all the sales in the world. You could have 10,000 sales, but it only equals up to $5,000 in a week. And that could be the lowest card on my reserve list section. That's what I'm talking about. It's untapped potential that they can't touch. And it's too bad for them. The die has been cast. It's set this way. So from here until the end, they've got to deal with the hand they've been dealt. Hasbro may not like it. They may be angry at past choices by Wizards of the Coast and past management decisions. And they may regret it. They may talk about, they may reminisce at cocktail parties about price-sensitive players eating my nachos and cheese, but they're stuck with it. So every time you see a reserve list sale, they're probably looking at revenue lost. Every time you see thousands of dollars exchanging hands on the secondary market that they don't control, revenue lost, and it just irks them to no end. Guys, this is where they're at right now. And every time we see sales like this, every time you see it, you know some player in Magic the Gathering is getting rich. I mean rich off of past decisions, because when a market's low like this, when the market is suppressed, and you have people ditching for liquidity, they're getting rid of cards. This is where asset classes are lost and gained by somebody else who has a stronger hand and can make money off this longer term. They can outweight players. They can outweight the weaker people. I hate to say it, that's how the rich become richer and the poor become poor. So we're going to take a look at the hottest selling cards on the reserve list. The Hot 10 Reserve List Edition. But when you look at these cards, look at the wealth being generated. Not all the sales have to be super high. It's the price of the cards there. And this is why every time I'm sure Hasbro looks at this stuff, they just say, what were you guys thinking at Wizards of the Coast? So here we are starting off at number 10 with Abeyance. And this card is from the Weatherlight Edition with a market price of $10. So think about this, $10 times 26 sales, it's only $260 to really get that card moving, right? To make it on the list this week. Because many of these cards are still being ignored by players. They're not focused on anything on the reserve list, which means there are other players sneaking in and generating wealth off the backs of these cards decreasing in value. 1 white, 1 generic. Until the end of turn, target player cannot play interrupts, sorceries, or abilities requiring activation cost, and then you draw a card. So you think about this in a commander game, choosing a person you don't want to attack or do any nasty things to you, you just get to use this at instant speed. This card has a lot of value and people don't recognize it. It's been as high as $40 and all the way it's down to $10. This is something not to ignore, but players do because they get caught up in the moment thinking of bigger, flashier things coming from the hype train, and they're not looking at the reserve list train, which is where they should be looking for future wealth generation. Now here we have Winding Canyons, again from Weatherlight, market price $16.96. This card's been as high as $75. 21 sales this week, but look at that market price, the average price, and then take a look at what the card actually can do for you in a game. It doesn't come into play tapped like many of the lands nowadays. It comes into play untapped, gives you colorless mana. 2. Until end of turn, you may play creature spells as though you could play instants. So guys, whenever you play an instant spell, you can play a creature. It's called Flash nowadays. Look at that ability. Last second, somebody's not going to look at that land. They're not going to think about it in a commander game. And all of a sudden, you come flashing some giant creature that doesn't have Flash for 2 colorless mana. With so much mana generation possible in a commander game, things like this can be a lot of fun to have around. And it's so inexpensive right now. Now, number 8 is Didgeridoo. Now, Didgeridoo and Winding Canyons actually had the same sale. So I could have put one or the other ahead of each other. I was waiting to see if more sales came on the list. But when you look at this card, remember this, okay? This one puts Minotaurs directly into play. If you don't think Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are not going to create more Minotaurs, you're wrong. They're coming your way sooner or later. Which means this card in Tribal for Commander is always going to have playability. This card's been $50, $60 US. Now it's $13. You can get near mint ones for 13 bucks. Are you kidding me? And yes, it's a Homelands card. Homelands was a horrible set for most people. They didn't enjoy playing it back in the day. But there are always key cards in the reserve list that can be broken by new cards coming into the meta. So when you take a look at Didgeridoo, it says pay 1 to get it out. 3, take a Minotaur from your hand and put it directly into play. Some of the Minotaurs out there cost 7 or 8. You could put this thing on turn 1 and turn 2 have a 7/8 creature. Guys, this is a disgustingly powerful card when built the right way. And at this price level, somebody who buys like 21 of these basically costs somebody $140 US because they bought some moderately played. If you think they're not going to make their money back later on, you're not thinking straight. As far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, a card like this probably should be $50, $60 because there's no way of really recreating a card like this. Not that Wizards would want to make it that easy to get these cards into play. So you got to remember the way they've designed the cards back then. In some cases, they looked weak because there wasn't a lot of choices. But nowadays, they look insanely powerful. And if you're buying any of these cards on TCG Player, please remember to use my affiliate link. It is found in the description of all of my videos. You click on that link, it takes you to TCG Player, and then anything you buy that day comes a little kickback to the Moxman of 3.5%, so I appreciate it, guys. Now, number 7, Gaia's Cradle, Urza's Saga. We talked about this a few weeks ago because this card keeps making the list. Why do you think it hasn't been on the list for half a year, and all of a sudden it starts showing up? Because players are buying moderately played, lightly played, and near mint. 25 sales this week. That's basically 25 grand in sales off of this card. Gaia's Cradle should not be this cheap, but it is right now. Okay? 1 green. Look at that. Just, it comes into play. It looks like a beautiful forest. Add 1 green to your mana pool for each creature you control. Think about the ways of getting creatures into play. Think about all the craziness you have. It doesn't have to be a green creature. It just says every creature. Cards like this are really powerful. They ramp things up to insane levels. And that's why players seek them out. And they've been buying them in some cases because It's cheap to get right now. But there are some people out there who are buying these and hoarding them. Okay? They know the market will turn eventually, and the way that inflation is slowing down and the way they're not raising interest rates as much tells people that we're kind of hitting that lower level where they should probably start investing in cards like this. It's scary to think about because it's a massive sum of money. I myself only own one, but that's where people are going with it. Keep it in mind. Now, number 6 is the Sliver Queen. Exact same story as Gay as Cradle. Stronghold. Market price $235.72. 30 sales this week. So we're talking what? You know, the 30 sales, we're talking what, $6,000 tops for a card like this for this many? Does that seem like a massive investment for 30 copies? Absolutely. But a player who wants to get a single copy for $185 heavily played Canadian, that's what it would cost you. $185 Canadian for heavily played, looking in the right place. You can also find these on Facebook groups, TCG Player, Card Kingdom, Card Market. Guys, you just got to look around. People aren't buying it right now. The thing makes slivers. And again, it's been on multiple weeks, just like Gay as Cradle. Here we have Savannah, the only dual land to make the list this week. 36 sales. Market price, $344.03 US. But look at that pricing all the way from 2021, 2022, and now we're into 2023. It is basically trending sideways, but it is dipping ever so slightly. $2, $3 off, $4 off, depending on condition. It is trending slightly downward, but it's on a sideways trend. Do not expect massive decreases from here on in for any dual lands. Okay, if you save a few bucks, great for you, but this is where they're at because people did pick through a lot of these cards in the last little while. Commander players were purposely seeking these cards out. They know the value, they know there's a return on investment on those, so they're willing to spend the money. Even if they didn't have it, they still bought them. Number 4, I don't know what's going on here. I like Rock Hydra, but it's here again. 40 sales. On TCG Player, you can find it for $1. So all it would take is $40 to buy 40 copies. Okay, it's not a huge thing, but that's all it takes to get onto the list with cards like this because it's sheer quantity. So if someone wants to make the hot 10, they just got to buy a lot of cards. Now let's look at the Rock Hydra. This is a revised edition. They had a limited collector edition, then it was taken away. The original OG Hydra. 2 red plus X. Put X +1/+1 counters, heads, on the Hydra. Each point of damage Hydra suffers removes a head unless the controller spends 1 red. So you can kind of keep the heads on. During controller's upkeep, you can regrow or add heads for 3 red. So on turn 1, 2, depending on how fast you can get your deck going, you could have this guy out there with just 1 head. It's a 1/1 creature, but then every turn you can start adding heads if you have nothing else to do, making this card big. All right? And there are ways of adding counters to things, aren't they? There are ways of proliferate and getting things going. I always have trouble pronouncing that. It's got to be the new haircut. It's made my head light. Guys, great card. A lot of fun. Not a high value card, but you never know what people can do and break these things later. Now, number 3, Earthcraft, and this is coming from Tempest. 46 sales. Again, this card was over $200. It hasn't fallen as much as other reserve list cards, but it's still about, what, 40% off at this point? And when you take a look at the card, 1 green and 1 generic. Tap an untapped creature you control to untap a target basic land. Remember that, it says basic. When you look at this card, though, look at the ways of using it. Yeah, it's a pretty broken card. You can really ramp things up in a nice way, and it's a cheap enchantment to get out, which means all those little 1/1 guys, turn 1 Land War Elf, turn 2 Earthcraft, untap a land. You can get things going with it. It's interesting to see. I like the card. I'm surprised that it hasn't risen higher in value, but this is where we're at. Let's go to number 2. Now, Deranged Hermit. Okay, I want to talk about this bad boy of comedy. When you look at Deranged Hermit, most players will say, hey, it's an okay card in a squirrel deck, but they've given us more squirrel tribal. If you think nobody's ever going to try to rebuild squirrel tribal going forward, or somebody who's never played the deck before isn't going to seek a card like this out, your head just needs to be tightened a little bit. The foil, $331.25. That's the first time they did foils. You can get a promo foil of this card as well when they did the reproduction cards. They shouldn't have done it, but they did. They got a slap on the wrist, but those cards exist. They'll cost you about half as much. But the market price is only $32. This card was $350. Guys, sorry, I said $350. I'm thinking of something else. Sorry, my bad. I'm looking at the foil again. Sorry, $150 for this card. And look where we're at. It's $30. It's lost massive amounts of value. When I look at this card and it comes into play and you create the squirrels, there's ways of bouncing it, bringing it back, recasting it, and getting a squirrel army going. Forget the echo cost. Look at the ways of having fun with this card, and it just makes it insane. No other card exists like it, and it's reserve list. A card like this being this cheap, 56 sales, and people buying sets of 4 when there's no reason to buy a set of 4 tells me somebody's out there getting copies. Now, number 1 this week is Null Rod with 57 sales, barely beating it out. But that's because of what Null Rod does. We've talked about this card for a long time. This card, again, had a higher value, like $350 roughly. And here we have it, well below the $100 mark. We've talked about this card for a while. 2 generic. Players cannot play artifact abilities requiring an activation cost. You can mess up so many things. This card, I remember, was barely skimming below 100, and I said, you know, somebody's going to start taking advantage of a card like this if it keeps falling, and that's what happened. As this card is dipping, players realize it probably shouldn't be ever sub 100, so they're grabbing the card. These are the values that Hasbro and Wizards can never tap into again. It bothers them. And the wealth generation from these cards when the market turns up and players seek them out. Imagine you buy this card for $80 and you're one of those players who has, you know, liquidity. You've got a lot of extra cash laying around. You buy 10 copies and market goes back up. This card hits a new high of 200. You've doubled your money. You don't buy 100 copies. That's hard to move. But if you buy 10 and you want to move 9 of them, that's pretty realistic by putting 1 up at a time on whatever platform you're selling on. You can only leverage so much. If you don't have a store or an outlet to sell massive amounts of reserve list cards, then you shouldn't be buying tons of them. You buy enough to make little bits of profit, aiming to what we call it trading up. So you're trying to trade up into higher reserve list cards. If I can buy, let's just say, 10 Null Rods, I'm keeping 1 for myself. I sell 9, I make $900 profit. Take my original 900 back, I have 900 profit. Now I can buy 2 dual lands, or I can work my way up into my first beat up Mox. This is how it's done. And players always forget that. And I don't understand why they forget it, but they get bored, they get lazy, and they go, I don't care, I'm just going to sell these cards off, get a few bucks back. I lost too much money on the reserve list. But the market turns. It always turns around. It has a history of turning. And the people who sell high, wait for the cards to dip, and then buy low and do it all over again, that's why eventually, when people get fed up and they hold the reserve list cards, hold the line, and you don't sell anymore, you're helping yourself because you don't have to rebuy the cards ever, and they're reserve lists, so they have longevity. Guys, that's where I'm at. Thanks a lot for being here. Thanks for hanging out on the channel. Can't wait to see the comments on this one. Guys, crazy time. Crazy time. Hey guys, a big shout out and thank you. This is that moment in time where I get to say thank you to each and every one of the fantastic patrons I have supporting me on this channel. Without their support, content's not possible. So thanks again, everyone. Have an awesome day. Here we are at the end, reserve list shoppers. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. Shop smart, shop as smart. Thanks for the ramble section, because you're the ones who make it to the end. You're the ones who will put Necronomicon inside the comment section. You know it's true. You know what? Some of these prices are too good to pass up. I agree. Some of them are just totally insane how cheap some of these cards are. But people are afraid to take that plunge, take that risk to dive back in, because you never know when a market's going to turn around. By the time you decide, it's too late. I know. Crazy stuff. But you know what? Thanks for being here. You make your own decisions.